Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way, so you don't have to. Join our host, Lacey Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. Every leader can become worthy of being followed if they are willing to put in the work. On this podcast, we share the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of what the work actually entails. We welcome you to this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I'm your host, and let us not forget, former terrible leader, Lacey Nelson. Today, I am so pleased to welcome Robert MacPhee to the show. Robert has an extensive background in helping others really figure out who they are, how they move through this world, leading other people, and he is a coach. He is a facilitator, and he is also the founder of Values Life. And he has so much wealth of experience, depth of experience. I can't wait to hop in. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. It's good to meet you and your amazing producer, Mary.
I know, she is fantastic.
Lurking in the background.
She is fantastic. She's amazing. I always say, if anything sounds nice or looks good, I probably didn't do it myself. So she's fantastic.
Yeah. Good leadership lesson right out of the gate, right?
Thank you for being here. I am just fascinated with your journey to where you're at now. So for our listeners that are meeting you for the first time, how did you arrive at this current pathway that you are on in life? Your story's fascinating, but I will not do it justice. I would love to hear you tell us how you got here.
All right. Well, yeah, when you get to be my age, you don't want to really start at the beginning because we'll be here all day. But I'll give you kind of three quick steps. Actually, when I first graduated from college, a very good friend of mine and I started an entrepreneurial journey. And that was really my first business experience of leadership, just kind of by accident, because we started this company. So he and I were the leaders. And it was just a summer job. It was actually a parking company, and we were doing valet parking for restaurants in northern San Diego on the beach. And it was so successful, it actually turned into a career. Like 7 years later, we had over 400 employees, and we were all over Southern California. And it was really great. But it was all kind of accidental. It was just two college kids doing the best they could to kind of figure it out along the way. And from doing that, we got to a point where we had to be learning how to manage the growth and deal with managers and teams and all those kinds of things. And I actually went to a one-day workshop, and it was one of these career track or skill path or something like that. I don't remember what the topic was, but the woman who was leading the workshop held up a set of audio tapes by Jack Canfield, who's the co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books and wrote the Success Principles, which is really the core of his work, and talked about his work. And I said, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I bought this set of tapes, and that led me on a journey to actually working with Jack. My partner bought me out of the parking company, and I was working with Jack for about 10 years.
Okay, wait. Hold up. How do you go from buying his set of tapes to working with the man?
Such a good question. And people would ask me when I was working with Jack. And I actually, over a period of time, became the director of training. So I was on stage with him. I was introducing him. I was facilitating part of the content. And people would see me on stage and go, oh, I want to do what he's doing. And they would ask the same question you asked, how, I want your job. How do I get your job? I want to work with Jack, kind of thing. And I'd say, well, here's what you do. You go to his training, and then you go to his training again because you really want to get even more depth. And then you have your wife go to his training, and then you volunteer to be on the assisting teams that support the training. And you do that for a few years. And then because you are really committed to that, you get asked to be the leader of those teams, which, talk about leadership, that was one of the most profound leadership experiences I've ever had in my life, leading the assisting teams that were supporting Jack's work, which is so profound. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on just that little chapter of my life. And then from leading those assisting teams, I took on a larger role, which was director of training. And I was running mastermind programs for him and doing all sorts of things around, not the Chicken Soup for the Soul part of his business, because that was completely separate, but the whole training side of doing workshops and mastermind groups and all of that kind of stuff. Actually, as we're recording this on Saturday, I'm emceeing Jack's 80th birthday
Oh my
party.
gosh.
He and I have stayed very close, and he's a good friend and still a mentor and a teacher. And
oh my gosh, what an amazing story! Oh, sorry to interrupt. I just I couldn't. My brain could not ask that question.
And
so.
Well, and I didn't want to take up all that time because it is, people think, oh, do I just fill out an application and I'll be the next director? No, it's like a very long step-by-step accidental kind of journey.
Well, an investment, right? Like it was at one point, it was no longer accidental. That was very intentional, I would imagine, to stay connected. Not knowing where it would end, but knowing I want to invest in this. This is something that's in so much in alignment with me. I can't not be part of it.
Yeah. Well, it was also, I think, a really good example of something that I noticed coming up as I listened to other episodes of your podcast, which is a lot of times people get asked to be put or get asked to be in a leadership position or are put in a leadership position, not necessarily because they've exhibited all the really great skills that a leader needs to have, but because they're really good at what they do.
Right.
And earlier in my career, that happened to me several times. Like I was committed to doing whatever I was doing really well. It's kind of a big part of the success of our parking company was we were committed to doing it really well. We weren't just going to kind of slack off. But you end up being asked to be a leader. And in some cases, that's fine because people have that capacity. But in other cases, it can be like a fish out of water. Kind of thing where people who are really good bartenders are suddenly trying to run a restaurant, and it's a whole different deal.
It is a different skill set. It is completely different deal. All right. Thank you for taking us on that little side journey. Back to the story. So working with Jack, working for Jack, and then...
Oh, I didn't even finish my journey.
I know.
Yes. I'm not working for Jack anymore. I'm just hanging out with him. Yeah. So the third biggest part of it, and there's been multiple iterations of that, is I kind of went as far as I could go with my work with Jack and then moved into doing similar work with coaching and consulting on my own. I created a program called Excellent Decisions, which was based on helping people make decisions and take actions based on their vision and values rather than all the external stress and pressure that we're all under in today's world. And then the next refinement, which is really where I'm focused now, was the realization that vision and values, that's great. My kids used to say, oh my God, vision and values, enough, Dad, with the vision and the values. But I realize it's great to have a really powerful vision, and it's important and valuable to have a really great vision. But if your vision is not aligned with your values, it's probably not going to go very well. It's not going to get you where you really want to go. So I really zeroed in on the values part of it because I realized that had to come first. And I still do work on vision. I still believe it's really, really important. But it starts with values in my work now, helping people clarify their values. And that's where the new book came from, the Living a Values-Based Life book. And I learned just how crazy it is. Like most people, they know how important values are. Nobody says values, oh, that's stupid. Why would I want them? But if you really push people and say, well, can you articulate what your highest values are? Most people can't. And so in today's world with media and social media and friends and family and coworkers and bosses and everything else wanting us to do stuff, most people are living their life in alignment with other people's values instead of their own because they don't know what their highest values are.
Right. Or they just say, oh, well, I guess this sounds good, but it's not theirs.
Yeah, or in the moment.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. What important work. Such important work. Also something we focus on here is getting really clear on what are your personal values. And even working with people leading, 9-figure companies, I am met with blank stares, like deer in headlights. They'll start reciting the company values. I'm like, that's not what I asked for.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting research about the fact that for both leaders and for all the way to frontline people, the real keys to engagement and creating the kind of culture that people really want to have in their organization, being an organization where people really love to work there, has more to do with the people in the organization and their connection to their personal values than it does to their connection and their ability to recite the organizational values.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 1,000,000%. Okay, so how do you help people come to this realization that they need this connection to their own values? Everyone thinks it sounds great, but doing the work to get there is usually not simple. It might be easy, but it's not. It might be simple. It's not an easy pathway, and it's not immediate.
Absolutely. And actually, my own approach and the approach that's in the book It does something very unique and different in the space of doing values work because I divide values into two separate categories. And the reason I do that is not incredibly scientific, but about 15 years ago, I was doing values work because I knew they were important. And I knew in order for me to get where I wanted to go, it would be really helpful to be really clear about my values. And yet I was doing the values work in the exact kind of way that you're describing it. It was confusing. And like the results I was getting didn't feel like I was going to remember it and be able to apply it. And I tried several different methodologies that are out there. And so many of them basically come down to looking at a list and picking the ones you like and then narrowing it down to your top 5 and voila, core values. And it just wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
And I tell people I've been doing this work for like 25 years and I only have 3 pieces of original content. And one of them is a very unique way of discovering core values. And that is by separating them into 2 categories. And the 2 categories we call priorities. Like my priorities are the areas of my life, the things that are important to me. Like for me, it's things like my relationship with my children and the contribution that I'm making and my health and well-being and building a successful business. These are things like nouns that are important to me. And then there's a whole separate category that I call ways of being, which is this is how I want to show up in the world. These are the qualities and characteristics that I really want to exhibit. Like I want people to say, oh, wow, he's a really caring person. I love how humble he is, you know, and they're both values, but they're different, right? Like my relationship with my children is different than humility. And I thought they were both in the category of values and all the values work I did put them on the same list. And then I was like, that doesn't really work. But as soon as I separated them, I had a list that I could look at and say, am I spending my time and attention on the things that are most important to me or not? Yes or no? I mean, I either am or I'm not. And am I showing up in the world? These are aspirational values. We can also look at our current life and say, okay, what am I doing? Where am I putting my time? How am I behaving? Those are my current values. But I like to really focus on aspirational values and get people moving in the direction of where they really want to be. But I could look at those 2 lists and self-assess in any given moment and identify the areas that I really wanted to be doing things differently and then decide what kind of actions can I take? What can I do differently to create more of the results or experiences that I want? And suddenly values became helpful to me. And the true confession built into it. So like I said, I told you I did that like 15 years ago or something, and it worked great for me. And you'd think as a coach and a consultant, I would build it into my practice and, you know, start using it with all my clients. And the truth is I didn't until about 2 years ago.
Okay.
I was doing another project and we had to bring some values work in. It was a social justice project. And we were working on getting people to really tap into how important social justice issues really were to them because they weren't responding to what we were offering. And that's where these 2 categories came up. And I was like, why haven't I been sharing this with people?
Right. Could you see the lights come on when the first time
it was embarrassing to have to admit to the woman I was working with, like, yeah, it works really well. This is really great. And we were building this model with the 2 categories. And she's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I was like, oh. But it turned out to be a blessing because it did get me to really zero in and focus on values and a unique way of helping people with values clarification. And it's probably the easiest concept in this world of coaching and consulting that I've ever had to share with people. Because again, people don't go, values? I don't need to know my values. That's not important. People get it right away and want to know more. So that's been good.
So Robert, what are some of the flags that if I'm a listener and I'm like, I think I'm living in alignment, but I'm not 100% sure. Like when you're working with people, what are flags to look for that actually I might need to do some more refinement with my core values, or I'm living out of alignment currently with my core values, but maybe I don't know it. What are flags that come up that can point me to needing to dig into that work further?
Well, I think the basic thing that's most valuable for people is to do the initial work. I mean, I would love to say even this, I'm thrilled that people who are going through this process that we've created are ending up with something in terms of the 2 separate lists that's really helpful to them. But there's still a process of clarifying and reflecting and refining the language. I mean, I've been doing this work for many years with my own values, and I'm still like refining and changing and adjusting depending on life circumstances. And I had a huge traumatic event 3 years ago in my life, and it changed my values. Like it affected my values and what's most important to me and where I'm putting my time and attention. So life changes, and just going through the journey of life, my values, if I look back to when I was in high school, thank God my values are very different now than they were then. So
aren't we glad social media didn't exist when we were in high school?
Yes. Well, and this is another interesting point about values with young people. I talk about excellent decisions and making decisions based on vision and values instead of external stress and pressure. You think about our young people today, really starting in like middle school, and the stress and the pressure that they're under and the decisions that they're being asked to make, and they're just kids. And if they do make a mistake, like you said, social media and everybody's got a video camera in their pocket at all times. I think of a few things I did in college, and I'm pretty glad weren't captured on video by one of my friends and put on the internet for perpetuity. Right. So there really is a tremendous amount of stress and pressure that our young people are under. And, my kids grew up while I was working with Jack, and I call that my unfair advantage. So they understand these principles of taking responsibility and knowing what your values are and being a leader and effective communication and asking for help. All these things, like we didn't have a flip chart and a, PowerPoint presentation at dinner every night. But they grew up just being in these kinds of conversations.
Oh, they're swimming in the water, right? Like it's just part of who they are and how they think.
Yeah.
Similarly, my boys right now, I've got a kid going into his freshman year of high school, and then I have a middle schooler. And this last year, the boys, actually this summer, a proud mama moment, they placed 7th in the nation as a little team in the Technology Student Association for leadership strategies.
Oh, so cool. They're listening to Mom's podcast. I love it.
Like, how in the heck? Because same thing. Not a flip chart, we're not going over slides, but they've just been swimming in those waters since they were tiny, and how much they take in it was astonishing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I seek out opportunities to work with young people, not as part of like my main business, because I've learned the hard way that like actually making money in that environment of working with young people is a very difficult thing to do. But I feel so grateful for having had the opportunity to learn all the things I learned while I was parenting my kids, especially when they were really young in those formative years. And if you look around, you don't have to look very far to see that most parents don't have that. That's I call it my unfair advantage.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Parents, most parents are just kind of like finding their way through as best they can with what their parents did and whatever they can kind of cobble up on the side. And it's hard. And I think it's, it's the most important work we do.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, not that we still don't make plenty of other mistakes. I always tease my kids. I'm like, don't save for college, save for therapy. Because mom and dad are doing our best, but we're not going to get everything right.
Yep.
And
I agree. It's not a matter of whether they're going to be in a therapy. It's just a matter of what they're going to be talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I hope we're not a main star, but we might be. So as parents in the therapy sessions, but.
No. Well, your story is so cool too. That one, that they're accomplishing at that level, but two, that it sounds like they're doing it together.
Well, they were in the Technology Student Association together at school, TSA, which I always have to say the whole thing because everyone's like, your kids are doing airport training? Like what? So they were doing it together, but they both were in the club, and my oldest son placed 1st in the nation for structural engineering. And he placed very high in the state, so he was going to automatically go. Little brother, also who's in the club, got to go and got to be part of, and there was one more member of their team, part of leadership strategies portion of the competition. They can select different areas to compete in, and they'd qualified high enough statewide to be able to compete at the next level. It was pretty cute. They thought they absolutely bombed it after they went into the semis. I got to go with them, and it was a super fun experience. They thought they bombed it, and had written off, we're not going to move on. And then the next day, later in the day, the list gets posted, and all of us are just shocked that they had made it to the next level. And anyways, it was a really fun experience. And my boys are very close in age, so it has been neat to see where they're in alignment with each other and the things they like to do. But they're also two like extremely different humans. But anyways, enough about me.
Well, but before you go on though, let me I can help you bring it back, because I think what just happened was you and I really aligning on a value that's really important to both of us. Like, I can tell listening to you that being a mom and in your relationships with your boys is really really important to you. Like, if we did this work of exploring your highest priorities, I'm guessing if it's not number one, it's really close. And so even though we're in this conversation about leadership and all this, eventually our values will pull us in the direction of the things that are most important, and sometimes find ways that we align.
Yeah.
And I see it happening all the time.
I mean, the reason I started my business was so I could live a life that allowed me to be present and show up for my kids when I wanted to, which is a lot. So
yeah, I travel a lot right now for my work, but I made a conscious choice when I was younger, and they were a lot younger and at home. They're way out of the house now. But yeah, I wanted to be there, and probably cost me some revenue during those periods of time, but it was what was most important to me.
Same. Absolutely. And also, I drag them with me on occasions to pull them out of school.
Field trip.
Yep. And they're doing great. I mean, they're both straight A students, which has very little to do with myself. I was not a straight A student. So, yeah.
Yeah, my oldest daughter was a PhD graduate. She's up close to you, kind of. She's in Seattle. She went to University of Washington and got a PhD in math and data science. And I say it skips generations, because I'm like, she tries to explain what she's doing, and I'm like, okay, that's great. Good luck
that
with
sounds great. Can we talk about people?
Yeah.
So I love this conversation. It is so true. When you hit that alignment and your values are aligned, you feel this spark, right, with people. Yeah. And when we're coaching others and we're working with a conflict in the workplace, one of the things that we often say is something to dig into and look for is you either have an actual or perceived core value misalignment with somebody that you're really struggling with. And if you were to encourage our listeners, like, hey, do this work. This is really valuable. What's something very practical they could do today to start understanding what their core values are?
Well, at a minimum, someone could start with literally what we've already talked about. My explanation of those two categories. And one of the things I often see in my conversations, kind of introducing people to the work that I do, is I start by talking about the importance of values. And again, it's not a difficult sell. So I don't have to spend 6 weeks explaining the importance of people kind of get that really quickly. And that lands them in the place like, okay, these values is really important. And then they land in, I don't know mine. And if I'm talking to someone in person, I can literally see it on their face. They're like, oh my God, he's going to ask me what my values are. And I don't know. But as soon as they hear this idea that there's actually a new way to do it, there's these two categories. And the answer to your question of like how to start is someone could take what they just learned about these two categories. And my explanation of one is these priorities, like what is most important to you, which you could explore on your own by simply sitting down with a blank piece of paper and asking yourself the question, what is important to me, over and over again? Just like make a list of the things that are important to you and keep going. Like, give yourself like 5 minutes and just keep answering. Because so often, and again, in today's world, we say, what's important to me? Well, making a lot of money and having a bigger house and 2 more cars and whatever, all the things that the world tells us should be important. But once those things are already on your list, if you're still asking, you'll start getting to the really juicy stuff, like the relationships in your life and making a difference in the world and these kinds of things. And then once you have a list, you can then look at it and say, okay, from that experience of asking this question, what shows up as the most important? And we have people go through a more in-depth process where not just asking an intellectual question, but doing more heart-centered work and a visualization process, really tapping in on a deep level. But just to start, someone could literally ask themselves the question, what is important to me? And make that list. Now you're in the game. Now you're really thinking about it. And you could take that top 5 list and, I always have 3x5 cards within arm's reach here, and you could put them on a card and stick it to your computer screen or on your bathroom mirror or your car, wherever you spend a lot of time, and keep it in front of you and remember and start moving in the direction of making your decisions and taking your actions based on what you've decided is most important to you. And then on the other side, you can do the same thing with your ways of being. it's not really a question. It's more of like a sentence completion thing that we invite people to do, which is to say, it's important to me to be what? Like, and again, for me, it's important to be caring. It's important to me to be aware. It's important to me to be humble. And you could do the same thing, backside of the same sheet of paper, right? Like you could just make a list and then look at that list and say, what are the 5? I always give people 6 if they can't narrow it down to 5, right? Like what are the 5 or 6 most important ways, the ways you really want to be? When people meet you, you want them to walk away going, wow, he's really blank, whatever. And it's different for all of us. But again, people can go to valuesbasedlife.com and you can get the book. You can sign up for an online course. Yeah. We have a leaders program. There's all sorts of things we can do if someone's interested. But literally to get started listening to this podcast,
you're already thinking about it.
You kind of got started because we've already gone through that process of... it's important. You're reminded that it's important. You've gone through, hopefully really quickly, we've taken through that like shame stage of, I should know my values and now we're in this conversation like, okay, there's actually something we can do about it. And again, I love it when I woke up this morning and I had a book order sitting right on my computer screen. I love that. But if people don't want to wait for the book, you can take what we've talked about here and get started on this process of discovering and clarifying. And the subtitle of the book is Discover, Clarify, and Live in Alignment, which is really my mission, is to help people really be living their highest values. Because this, you work with organizations. I think you talked about it earlier. There's a plaque up on the wall with our values. And then all the employees are like, what a joke that is, because we don't live in alignment with any of those values. It's actually hurting your culture instead of helping it. So the living in alignment is really the exciting part of the values.
1,000,000%. Yes. I love this.
Hey listeners, Mary Scott here, producer of Confessions of a Terrible Leader. Fall planning is in full swing around here at Transcend Leadership Collective, and a huge part of that is gearing up for the Lift 2.0. What is the Lift 2.0, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. Back in April, we launched our very first cohort of the Lift, and our attendees have spoken. Graduates of the Lift have reported increased confidence to pitch their ideal position and wave goodbye to office drama with effective problem-solving strategies. They now have clarity around their personal brand as a leader and dialed in their business plans and priorities. Managers have learned to maximize their employees' potential with our refined delegation strategy. That's right. The Lift is for managers as well as the next generation of emerging leaders. Someone's got to herd the cats. Anyway, let's elevate your career to new heights together. Head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com/the Lift waitlist to reserve your spot for our next launch of the Lift in September. The Lift, because it's way easier than hiking yourself up to the top.
All right, I'm going to switch gears on us, Robert. You touched on it maybe a little bit, or maybe you have something else for us here, but it's confession time. Are you ready to step into the confessional?
Absolutely. I love that you do this. I also love that you warn people that you're going to do it too. And I listened to some of your episodes beforehand. So my biggest problem was choosing which one. Oh my God.
Right? Same.
Can I just use general incompetence as general cluelessness?
Right. I think, I definitely am relating to that. If you are to pick one, what is the story that you are here to confess to our listeners today in your trajectory and your journey? Where did you screw up real good? And how does it impact the way that you move through the world today?
Well, I really appreciate the question because it really did make me kind of reflect over my career and look at what were the moments, what were the teaching moments. And I went all the way back to, I told you when I first graduated from college, I was running this parking company and I was kind of thrust into this leadership role. And what I was doing so much of was focusing on what other people think, number one, and specifically thinking as the leader that I needed to have all the answers. And it was killing me. It was just it's such an unwinnable game to want to have all the answers.
Yes.
And I actually had the opportunity in a meeting with one of our clients. We were already working with one of their restaurants and we were pitching them to work with a couple. There's a chain of restaurants and we were pitching them to work with a couple of others. And I remember going into this meeting, I have to have all the answers, I have to be ready and they're going to ask this and I'll be, and I was just all wound up. And the person that we met with, his name was Sandy Saxton. And he was such a great mentor to me in this moment because we went into this meeting and I was all my wound up self. And I watched him, and he was older and very successful restaurateur. And I watched him and I was like, he's not doing that. He's not wound up. And he knows so much more than I know, but he has no need to like have all the answers. And I watched how he showed up in that meeting. Just, something would come up that he hadn't thought about, and he was very reflective and took his time and asked clarifying questions. And I was like, I want that experience instead of this experience. And I could probably tell like that's many years ago now for me. But I remember that experience so profoundly. Again, that being a leader is not about having all the answers, but it's being willing to just be open and transparent about the fact that you don't know, but you want to know, and you can find out if you need to. So that totally changed the way I approached leadership.
I love that.
I don't think it changed the hard wiring, because I still have a tendency to do that, but I become aware and I stop it.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that Bob Newhart video from many years ago?
I don't know.
Bob Newhart as a therapist, and his therapy is just stop it.
But I can visualize.
That was
That's
really good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes. And what a blessing you got to learn it so early on, right? That you got to have that seed planted. My younger days, I wish I would have learned that faster.
Yeah.
I managed to get it in before I was 30, but man, it was not fun getting there. So
yeah, and now when you see people doing that, don't you just like feel bad for them? Like, oh, stop doing that. That's so exhausting. And it's not necessary, because it's actually like I had so much respect for him as a leader because he wasn't doing that.
Right.
Even more than I would if he did. And again, he couldn't. None of us can have all the answers.
No, there's so.
I like playing winnable games instead of unwinnable games.
Right. Yeah. No, we don't have all the answers. The second we think we do, we should be immediately recognizing that's a red flag, or that we should. Right. Not even that because we know we don't, which is part of the anxiety. We know we don't, but it's really scary.
Yeah. We're just trying to convince people that we do.
Yes, and we don't.
Again,
need to do
unwinnable game.
One of the phrases I like to use with our workshops and with our clients is like, stop shoulding all over yourself. Let go of the shoulds. You should not actually know everything. There's no way that you can. What a powerful lesson. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sure.
Thank you for the question. Like I said, there were all sorts of things that could have been on that list. That was the one that it was such a great memory for me of a teaching moment.
When you're practicing self-awareness, what happens internally to cue you that like, oh, yep, I want to do that thing again. I need to not go down that path. What is that internal process like for you?
Well, I think it's a process that gets developed over a pretty significant period of time. I think people who are committed to lifelong learning and continuing to learn and grow become more and more open to that. And I do think over time it becomes easier to have the awareness and the ability to shift into kind of a better pattern. I see people who are out there promising to get rid of all your limiting beliefs.
Oh, gosh.
And I call BS on that. My personal experience in my work with my clients, I've never succeeded in getting rid of limiting beliefs. But what I believe people can do is they can increase their awareness of those kind of patterns that show up in the way that our limiting beliefs can be running our life. And we can learn all sorts of great new tools. People who are listening to this podcast are the type of people who are looking for great ideas and new ways to do better. And again, for me, like, Stephen Covey said, he who is good with a hammer thinks everything is a nail, right? But I go right back to values because if your values are clear and you're living your life out of alignment with your values because you have that clarity, you will notice it. And then you'll have to decide, like, am I going to let that current pattern keep running the show? Or is this important enough to me to do something different? And the reason I was interested in being on a leadership podcast is I believe if someone is calling themselves a leader, if they really aren't clear about their own values, I question whether they really are a leader because they're following something else other than their own values, other than what is most important to them. So I believe, and again, I admit to being biased, but I believe our values define us as a leader. The kind of leader I am is defined by what's most important to me.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for sharing your expertise with us today, with our listeners. Robert, for our listeners that are really resonating, where can they find you? What's the best way to get connected? We'll drop all the links in the show notes, but what's the best way to connect with you and your work?
So one of my values is simplicity. I'm not one of these people who has 27 gatekeepers. I'm not that hard to find. You can go to our website, which is valuesbasedlife.com, and connect with me and learn more about the work that we're doing, whether you want to do work as an individual or in context with your organization or your team that you're leading. One of the things that's there is an opportunity to set up a call with me if you're interested in learning more. And again, access to the resources like the book and the courses and the programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. You guys are great. I love the opportunity to play and be challenged and asked to go into the confessional. And this has been really good. And I'm glad we're recording this really early in the morning where I am. And this is a great way to start my day. So thank you
likewise,
so much.
Likewise. Thank you. Oh, listeners, thank you so much for being here again for another episode. And we know how we sign out around here. Till next time, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for being part of this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams. If one-to-one coaching, engaging workshops, or strategic planning that is actually useful are anything that interests you, make sure to head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our free resources. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Lacey Nelson and produced by Mary Scott. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.